All right. So could you just tell me a little bit about yourself and then what you've been doing in your career since graduating from the Leadership Institute?
Yeah, of course. So I graduated from Miami in 2017. I had majored in biomedical engineering with a concentration in bioinformatics, and I had computer science and Spanish minors. So right after graduating, I started work at Eli Lilly in Indianapolis. And for those who don't know, Lilly is a pharmaceutical company. We're probably best known for insulin. So we make a third of the world's insulin, but we obviously have medicines and other therapeutic areas as well. And I work specifically in medicines development IT. So at Lilly, we have our IT organization that is directly aligned to kind of like the different stages of clinical development of a drug. So we have like research, medicines development, which is directly aligned to clinical trials, manufacturing. So how do we actually make all the medicine once it's approved? The business units, which is all like commercial, marketing, sales, all that kind of stuff. So, anyways, I work in medicines development IT. My role is called the solutions architect on the digital biomarkers team. So, my specific team works on how can we be innovative and use novel technology like apps or wearables or sensors in clinical trials. So we have those types of technology, available to many consumers. I mean, a ton of us have an Apple Watch, all that kind of stuff. So how do we actually take advantage of those in clinical trials and get more data from patients and all that kind of stuff? So it's definitely a good combination of my biomedical engineering and computer science backgrounds to be like in the medicine and device space, but actually working in IT and the tech. So it's been really exciting. Lilly's a great place to work. Always got to put the little plug in there. So yeah, it's been really fun.
For sure. And then what are some of the bigger obstacles that you faced when transitioning from college to work?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess let me preface this by saying I really do think that Miami and the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute prepared us well, and I'm not just saying that to say it. I started at Lilly with a cohort of other people who had just graduated from a number of different colleges, and I really do feel like I was better prepared than a lot of them. So I guess that's a positive. But that being said, there are definitely obstacles that I've faced, and it's just different in some different ways. So I guess I can give two personal examples that my guess is that they're somewhat universal in nature. So probably other people will experience them as well. But the first is really just around the kind of like increased ambiguity in projects. So what does that mean? So we all started going to school when we were like 4 or 5 years old, and we go to school 5 days a week for 16 years. And for the most part, I think we all get pretty good at school. We know when you're in high school, these are the classes I have to take. This I need to volunteer X amount, and I need to be in these activities to get into the college I want. And then at college, basically redo all that to get a job or get into grad school or get into med school. And it's pretty well defined what you need to do. And even like more granular than that, the projects that you do, there's a syllabus that tells you this section is 5 points, this section is 10 points, whatever. Like it's just really laid out for you. And I think that's one of the biggest differences in what I've experienced in the real world, which is projects aren't like that. They're not laid out, and there's not a very clear path on what success is.
Mhm.
And so I think, it's a tricky balance of there's opportunity then to be really creative and open-minded at the beginning of a project. You have a little bit more autonomy to say, this is what I think we should do versus maybe somebody else has a different idea, and there's space for that. But then there's this need for like a self-motivation and self-direction to say, okay, at some point we have to actually just like get something done. And it might
Mhm.
not be exactly what somebody else is thinking, but we can say this adds value. So I think like that idea of you kind of just have to like figure stuff out for yourself sometimes. It's not super clear what you're supposed to be doing all the time. So I think that's, one difference. I'd say the other big thing that I've experienced is it's really increased diversity in my job and probably many jobs compared to college. I think specifically the big obvious one is age, right? So,
For sure.
college, you're surrounded by everybody that's 18 to 22 years old. Um, so I think there's, for me personally, there was definitely an obstacle of, you know, building up my self confidence to be like, okay, I have as much to add to this project as anybody else. Now, there's obviously like some humility in saying somebody who's been at Lilly for 25 years has different experience than I do. That's fair. Um, but instead of, looking at those people who are our parents' age and saying, "Oh, I don't know if I can speak up at this time," and I don't know if my idea is going to be as good as theirs. That's something that was a big obstacle for me to kind of reframe that and say, okay, no, like I bring a different set of experiences. I probably have maybe some more relevant ideas as it relates to technology than some of these people, and that's valuable. So I think, just understanding, hey, like I deserve to be here. They hired me for a reason, and I have a voice, and I need to use it. So I think that, but then also a lot more diversity in kind of like the education and technical background that people have.
Hmm.
So as much as you can try in college to interact with different people, the reality is the work that you're doing, um, as it relates to like education or professional things, is with other people in the College of Engineering and Computing.
Hmm.
People are different, absolutely. I'm not saying everybody in that school is the same, but everybody's studying similar things. I think, for me now, on any given day, I'm probably interacting with, PhD data scientists, procurement, our quality and audit organization, obviously other IT people, and a lot of study teams that have more clinical background. So we all speak very different like business languages. Me coming at it from an IT perspective is really different than somebody who is in audit, or quality and wants things to be controlled a certain way, whereas maybe I'm coming at it with innovation. Um, so I think, figuring out how do we gain alignment, and maybe we're not always thinking the same or would have the exact same ideas, but how do we make sure that we have communication so that everybody understands what's happening? So I think that's another big difference between college and career, is just you interact with people that are very different than you, and that's healthy and that's great, but we're obviously drawn to people that are more similar to us. So figuring all that out is definitely an obstacle, but it's super important to be successful.
Absolutely. And then what kind of unexpected changes have you been exposed to since you graduated? And then what strategies did you kind of use to embrace that change?
Yeah, that's a great question. um, I guess again, I can give a couple examples and then maybe kind of speak at a higher level, just things I've been learning personally. But obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention COVID-19. I work at a
For sure.
pharmaceutical company in the healthcare industry, so I have to bring it up. And I think, there's maybe 2 points here. The first is it's probably not much different than what you guys are facing now. We're all working remotely. We have been for, I don't know, almost 3 weeks now. I'm losing track of time, 3 or 4 weeks, whatever. So we still have projects we're working on. We still have deadlines. We're working on clinical trials that are still happening. So it's not like things are shut down.
Hmm.
But how do we stay productive? How do we keep collaborating when we're all working from home? So again, I think you guys are seeing the same thing with still having classes, and how does that work remote, or even
Hmm.
having the virtual summit or virtual conference. Um, and trying to figure out like what exactly does that look like.
Definitely.
There's not right answers, right? Like this is so bizarre. So I think that's obviously a huge change, is how do I stay motivated and productive? But a huge piece around how do I still collaborate with other people, and shout out to technology, because I don't know what we'd be doing if we didn't have it. But then I guess a little bit more specific to Lily there. Again, obviously, in us being in the healthcare industry, we are working directly on a few different COVID-19 initiatives. So we have drive-through testing facility set up at our campus, and we are partnering with a company called Abcelera, who extracted some antibodies from people who recovered from COVID-19. So we've got some plans in the works on figuring out how we could come up with some type of treatment. And in both of those scenarios, there's a lot of device work that goes on, and clinical trials obviously that will come. So my team is playing a pretty big role in some of that. So I think in both of those cases, as it relates to change, like these are new things. And again, our traditional work and what we had committed to previously hasn't just disappeared. So I think, what we're trying to figure out is how do we, still deliver and deliver with excellence on the things that we knew we were doing, but we have this new stuff that's come in, pretty high stress situations. People are spending a lot of time on those things. So, how do I balance making sure I'm talking to people and getting things done in my day job, when those people might be spending 15 hours doing drive-through testing for COVID that day. So I think that, a big learning there has just been, having some patience with people, and like, you have to change expectations when something like that happens. I can't expect that somebody's going to respond to me with the same speed that they would without all this going on. Like, that's just the reality of the situation. So we need to like let go of some of that and just be okay with it and do our best to move forward. I think, maybe another example unrelated to the COVID-19 stuff is, tactically our team is directly aligned with clinical trials and study teams. And, I wasn't super familiar with clinical trials before I started working at Lilly, but if I had thought of them, I think what I would think is, it's clearly very regulated, they're very structured. And I think something that has been interesting and that I've learned is, they change so frequently, it's kind of ridiculous. In the 3 years I've been working, I don't think I've ever supported a trial that actually started when we thought it was going to, or had the same protocol and the same devices from the beginning to actually starting the trial. So I think there's constant change in what our team is being asked to do. And I was talking with my brother, who's a junior at Indiana University, as he was going through some interview process for an internship. And one of the questions that he was told he should prepare an answer for was around, how do you communicate how you're prioritizing things? So if you have a lot of deadlines, how do you prioritize those? What does that process look like? And I was talking to him about, there's kind of 3 key things in every project. There's timeline, there's scope, and there's people or resources or money. And if you shift the timeline and now you have to deliver earlier, you either need to decrease scope or increase resources. You can't possibly, like, those things can't stay the same if you change something else on that triangle. And so I think that's definitely a strategy that my team as a whole and myself personally try to use, as we often have scope change and often have timeline change, is being honest about that change with leadership or with others, and communicating like, hey, we can definitely, like, we want to be helpful here, and we would love to be able to deliver these new capabilities. But you have to recognize, like, either timeline needs to push or you need to give us more people to help. And so I think that's a big thing, as far as approaching change is okay, but be honest about the impact of it. Don't sit around and hope it works out, and then the day comes you were supposed to have something done and it isn't done. That's worse than just saying up front, hey, I'm happy to work on this, but that means I'm not going to work on this other thing. And like, let's be open about it and figure out the best path forward. So I think
Absolutely.
that's a big one. And then I'll just end with kind of higher level what I've been really working on the past year, um, which is, my personality, and I learned a lot of about myself through the Lucky Martin Leadership Institute, is I really like to be in control of things, and I like things to be well defined. Um, and I think I probably thought of change, in the past as uncertainty, and that uncertainty often leads to some anxiety or some fear. And I didn't really like when things changed because it meant I didn't have control of the situation. But I think, how can we reframe what change is, to really appreciate how important it is and how beneficial it can be. And I love the definition that you guys had come up with, that um, Louise had shared with me about, hey, change is about developing an open mind and being inclusive and inspiring creativity. And like, those are such positive things. So if that's how we're thinking about change, how much better is that than thinking, oh, change means I don't know what's going on and I don't have control? Like, no, change is an opportunity to be creative and to learn new things. So I think that's been something I'm really focused on. We can be very dramatic, and we can get so focused on things that don't even really matter. So again, like, how can we kind of move beyond that? How can we take a step back and say, okay, is this really worth me getting so worked up over, or me so scared about this thing changing? Probably not. Let's have a little bit of perspective. But then as soon as I do feel myself starting to get a little bit anxious about, oh, something changed and I don't know what it means, and like, I got to figure it all out right now, it's like, no, take a deep breath, reframe this. What can I learn through this? How can we improve or be more creative or be more inclusive because of the situation that we're in? So I think Lily does a good job of this because they're constantly reminding us everything we do is for the patient. So it's kind of hard to not, take a step back and have some perspective when you're thinking, hey, I'm having a stressful day today and somebody just threw something at me and I have to adapt. When you take a step back and you realize, I'm doing this for this breast cancer patient and their family, or I'm doing this for this person who has debilitating migraine, it kind of like automatically shifts how you're thinking. But even if you didn't work at somewhere like Lilly, I think we all have our core values and mission, right? So I think taking a step back and thinking, how does this fit into that, and
Hmm.
can I calm myself down a little bit and reframe this? I think that's really important.
Yes, thank you. And then finally, I know you kind of touched on this a little bit before, but what was helpful in your work that you learned from the Leadership Institute? If you could kind of dive into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah, of course. There's a lot, I'd say. I think it's not always super obvious when you're going through school in general, but definitely through the Leadership Institute. Um, Sometimes you're like, how does this relate to anything? But that's because I think it relates so much to what you're going to do in your job, way
Hmm.
more than it does to what you're doing in school.
For sure.
So until you experience the real world and the job, you can't have a full appreciation for it. But I'd say, at a high level, the biggest thing is just that kind of broad awareness and broad perspective. So I know, like, one of the things we talked about when I was in the Leadership Institute was like the 7 levels of consciousness, and moving from like that like survival, like personal focus mode, up to this idea of serving like the greater good of the world. Um, and I think in order to reach that place of like service and thinking about others and leading others through change or whatever, you have to understand yourself. And I think that was like one of the biggest things that the Leadership Institute did for me, is just help me better understand myself and how
Mhm.
I communicate in certain situations, how I respond to situations. So, I mean, these are the obvious things, but like we did Myers Briggs, we did Strengths Finders.
Mhm.
I know we like did the saboteur assessment from Positive Intelligence, and those things are so helpful just to have like that personal reflection. And like something that is a result of all those things for me is that idea of control and not liking things to change. But now I know that about myself, so I can like combat that and figure out like what are the good parts of that that I need to keep, but what are the parts that are holding me back. So I think just that idea of having an awareness of yourself, and then obviously as you get to know yourself, you have an awareness of other people as well. So that's like the nice thing about being in a cohort is um, people in the cohort are going to do things differently, are going to think differently. And as you start to understand how you work, you start to understand how that person might be different than you and how you might have to change the dialogue with them or change how you're communicating with them to actually get to a place of like being effective and getting along. So I think like, tactically, you're especially like junior year, right? We all say this, but you're like put in this like fairly high stress situation, even different for you guys having to go with this change like a month before your conference is supposed to happen.
Definitely.
But it gives you that opportunity to figure out how you do respond in those situations. And I said I deal with a ton of different type of people at work, and so just recognizing people are different from me. I'm not working with everybody that's the exact same, and that's okay, and that's
Mhm.
good, and that cultivates creativity and innovation. Um, so I think, you know, as students, you can be like so drilled into, I have to finish this equation for differential equations class, and like that's what my whole focus is on. Like, have I ever used any of that in my job? No. No, I'm not saying that nobody ever will. But I think the higher perspective around leadership and communication and developing yourself personally, that's been
Mhm.
what's been super applicable in my job. And I think that's part of the reason, as I said earlier, that I felt like I was way better prepared to really step in and start working and working with people faster than a lot of the other people who started with me. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all of your insight.
Yes, of course. Thanks for having me.
Uh-huh.